Okay, so yeah, this slide, little lag and delay here I see from my computer here to the screen here. Okay, good. So yeah, so we're gonna still trying to see if we can do an in-person meeting for 2023, but we need sponsors, so that's just the idea. So maybe hopefully someone will see this and help sponsor. But some the regular COVID news, covert news, I should say, the papers. Not any new papers in the past couple of weeks. It's just the most recent paper is this one in Science Advances from our people here about our COVID exposure assessment tool, which finally came out, which is nice. But more papers in the horizon. I know there's this preprint here that we submitted. Hopefully we accept it soon. So maybe that'll be updated soon. So just a brief covert updates. Al's leading a monkeypox subgroup. If people want to dive into that, I know some people are already looking into that, and they're starting to maybe have regular meetings soon. Also, Al has an interesting case report. I've said this every week that he's trying to pursue, so people want to reach out and help him there. And then, eventually, I keep saying every week, long COVID subgroup start again, but we're going to start that up eventually. And again, this is the YouTube channel that we started with our weekly updates that one of Marshall Porterfield students helps out with that, and then Victoria's helping out keeping the update here. Okay, let's go into the news. So I mentioned Eric Toppel's blog. It's a pretty nice blog. He does a good job and keeps it up to date. So a lot of times look at that as a reference to see what's happening there and then share with you guys. But in addition to the rest of the news, but this week he posted some nice papers and nice little articles here and his interpretation of them. But one of them is related to basically the booster response for the vaccines here. And this one's talking about how this paper here, the Science Immunology paper, talking about how the subsequent boosters after your initial shot doesn't necessarily have the same response as the initial boosters, meaning the T cell response. So the memory gets lost and it wanes after a while. So it's an interesting paper they're talking about, because this is a plot from there. Where after your initial booster, we see that it's not necessarily. Okay. No. Yeah, that eventually your waning antibody immunity from your first boosters might not last first shots might not last with the boosters eventually, or might not be coming back. So an interesting paper here on that. And then there's another paper that came out this past week, a few days ago, talking about Nature Communication, talking about the gut microbiome and how with COVID patients this has been altered. And I know people have looked into this, and there's been several papers here, but this one here, as Eric Toppel pointed out, is an interesting one where it's talking about the disruption of gut microbiome with the COVID infection and how this might lead to potential antibiotic resistance. So in this study, they got patient samples from blood cultures and they tested it, and I forget how many patient samples are in here. But anyway, they're looking at how basically they profiled the type of bacteria, the co-infections that might evolve with COVID. And a lot of these start developing antibiotic resistance, they notice, and then also some of them might lead to secondary infections, bacterial microbial infections, gut microbial infections specifically. So then, they also did some mice experiments that showing this, how the gut lining, the epithelial cells might be part of the mechanism that is changing, with the bacteria into the bloodstream. So it's an interesting paper there.
Option?
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, did they look at the gut-brain axis in that study?
No, again, I briefly looked at it, but I didn't see anything in my quick look over here about talking about gut-brain. But yeah, that's an important thing to look at.
Maybe. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Afshin?
Yeah.
Did they check for lipopolysaccharide generating LPS in the circulation?
I didn't. As I said, I only briefly looked at it. They might have, and I might have missed it. So take a look at the paper and see. They might have.
Okay.
But I didn't see that specifically as one of their key takeaways from this work if they did look at it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. As I said, I only had time to briefly look at some of these papers, so they might have details in there for some of the stuff you mentioned. Oops. So then the next study that was on there, which is actually some maybe good news because you might have heard some of the recent preprints. These are all preprints now for this, but you might have heard some recent couple of preprints that talking about our bivalent booster that came out, right? They're talking about how it might not have any improved defense against the new variants BQ.1.1 or BA.2.75.2 compared to the old boosters. So those studies, they had some caveats here where, the prior, is this right here is, as the prior studies did, they use a pseudovirus assay. Whereas this new study is actually showing that the bivalent boosters do actually provide, as you see in this plot here from this graph, some benefits and actually protection to help, these two variants who are supposed to be immune invasive actually have better response and better protection. And this study here has actually, as Eric Topel points out too, they didn't use the pseudovirus assay. They used the more, live virus assays, which is more accurate, for this type of assessment. So actually, that's probably some good news for the bivalent study, and it's not necessarily counteracting the previous studies, but evolving from that to a more accurate assay as opposed to the pseudovirus assays those previous two studies used. And again, these are all preprints, so and same with the previous studies; they're still under pre-review.
Is there a brief explanation of what a pseudovirus assay is or how it works?
It's pretty self-explanatory. Pseudovirus meaning it's not the actual virus, right? SARS-CoV-2. They kind of use a mimic of it. I'm not too familiar with the assays. I don't know if someone else here is more familiar with the pseudovirus assays than me. They could speak up now and describe it to the group. In the paper, they have the methods of it. Of course, you can read the paper, the previous papers, as you say, the previous preprints that did the pseudovirus assays. You can read this.
Well, I'm not sure I'm correct, but when we talk about pseudoviruses, it has the viral envelope proteins, and you're looking at uptake of the pseudovirus, but it doesn't have the viral genome. And so, if they were looking at spike protein immunology, maybe that's what.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. In the previous papers, they're looking at the spike immunology, so that makes sense, Doug. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Yeah. So take a look at this preprint, and if you're interested, so that's good news. Get your boosters. I got mine end of September. And then the other part was the talking about the vaccine versus pathogen response. Again, it's kind of evolving from here, and they're showing that, for example, in Canada, there's some studies that came out and recent news that came out, for example, in Canada, emphasizes slippage in the vaccine protection in BA.5, meaning, before this bivalent one, talking about the previous boosters. So that's why, again, Eric Topel's promoting getting your booster, as I am too. And this previous thing he talks about here, the advancement talks about, is I think even more evidence that we should all get our boosters. Okay, and then one last thing here from his blog is, this is a nice complicated on this lower right panel here, complicated diagram of the, BA, the Omicron evolution and all the mutations that people who are more knowledgeable about what all these mutations do and the spike and so on has evolved to. And then, BQ.1.1 is in this lower right region there, so you can see, and it's accumulated all these different mutations and more, which is why it's being more immune invasive. But he talks briefly about that and how this, again, is a concern, and how the U.S. is pretty much going to be dominant BQ. And I'll show you the stats from the CDC what BQ.1 is in use. Just like Europe, BQ.1.1 in Europe pretty much is becoming, I should say, the dominant strain there, or variant. Okay, so I don't know, people feel free to interrupt, questions, anything, comments. And this leads to here, articles you see here, COVID BQ waves. It's already starting in New York, as we've seen, and California's reaching out there. Fauci just said the other day, was this yesterday? Yep, yesterday, that, the COVID deaths are still too high. I think we're all aware of that. We're preaching the choir here, but he's saying this to the public, this is not okay, so we should still think of ways to mitigate the response of, or the infections that are occurring. Here's a paper that I thought people might be interested to see, but it's just a paper looking at how when did it come out? It came out this past week, I think. But basically, it's talking about how infants, like in 1 month old, that in that period of time, are less likely to, or get a lower response or lower chance of getting infected, or symptoms, I should say. They still get infected, but they get lower symptoms when their, let's say, mother or maternal or paternal caregivers get infected. In this case, they're looking at maternal more than the father. That's what the data they had. And this is some of the figures from here. They're looking at basically IgG, IgA response, antibody responses, and you can see here like the infant and mother and the response there. I mean, again, it's a study that, of course, would need more to evolve from and get more N numbers, but it's kind of striking. You see how the antibody response is between the mother and the infant. And basically, the take-home message was, like about half the infants of the COVID positive develop symptoms or antibodies indicative of COVID-19 infection. That was kind of, there's a lot more in that study to talk about, but that's sort of one of the take-home messages there. And they basically analyzed, surveys, questionnaires. So there are some limitations of the study, but it seems interesting to maybe others pursue further. But I'll share that. They didn't go too much into the biology other than looking at the antibody results. That's it. So this is another study that I saw that people might be interested in, looking at life expectancy changes since COVID-19. Here's this one figure I thought, ranking the countries and how life expectancy changes have decreased. This is a little confusing sometimes, this plot, but you can see when it has a turn gray here, over time, some countries have increased life expectancy from 2019 onwards to 2021. So that means that they might have improved it based on whatever changes they did in their system once COVID started. But U.S. is up there, one of the top 3 countries. And another interesting, it's more of an epidemiological kind of study they did here, but another interesting finding, they said women actually had increased lifespan for a lot of things than men. And basically the results were, that finding males were more affected by excess deaths, which makes sense when you look at this. This is what we knew. What we know is that in general, the acute COVID case, males got impacted more than females. And then I'll go into some papers that came out, or articles come out saying females are more impacted by long COVID. Some studies, newer studies that, again, confirmed older studies. So this was interesting to see that females, for some reason, had some countries, this is kind of going by the order of what countries, they might have had an increase of life expectancy. But U.S. had the biggest increase in sex gap that they reported. So no biology again, but purely looking at the numbers and how things have changed. Oh, did someone have a question or comment?
Well, of course, when you have a pandemic and you have high degree of lethality, the survivors tend to exhibit a higher degree of life expectancy.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so we'll see if that's the case. But again, they didn't go into the biology. So here's another study talking about, vaccine. Well, it's vaccine effectiveness from South African study. Again, this is kind of a limited study, but I think it still was interesting and probably warrants to look at further, work on it. But it's talking about how regular physical activity might help improve like vaccine response. So what they looked at in the South African population, low activity, meaning 60 minutes, least moderation, moderate, and high. And again, I think they can improve their stats here, but again, it seems like trending to the right direction, where you have at least, let's say, 150 minutes of activity or moderate activity per week. It did improve like the vaccine effectiveness. And they basically did like a negative case control study, which is described here if you're not familiar with it. Again, they didn't look at the biology or anything, but it was an interesting control study that showed some improved response with more improved physical activity after you get your vaccine for response. And they basically looked at hospitalization. So that was their end point of that study. Here's actually a fun, I thought, article I saw. Whether it's true or not, but I thought I'd share this. But I'm sure there's a lot of coffee drinkers in our group. I drink tea, but this could also be applicable to tea too. So these are some biochemists that put out this paper here, and this is some of the highlights of the paper, whereas they're saying, and this is like an article on phys.org where they're talking about summarizing the paper. But basically, they're talking about how this chlorogenic acid, this one compound, one of the more prominent compounds that are in coffee, what is it, caffeoylquinic acid? Probably didn't pronounce it right, but which is found in coffee. Actually, with their they did some docking type, machine learning docking type like computational assays, looking at how this might inhibit the spike, region with, between the interaction of that. And they saw that basically with their simulations, they saw that it can provide an inhibitory effect to the, spike region and the ACE2 receptor. Again, what they even claim in their study in the paper, there's a lot more studies to do. This doesn't mean that if you're a coffee drinker, you're immune to COVID, but but it means, hey, maybe there might be something here that, people who drink more coffee might have an extra boost connection. But also T has this 5-CQA is also the abbreviation, and I was looking at trying to find the equivalent of this in tea versus coffee, and this is a paper from a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, that quantified this. That coffee has a lot more, of course, than tea. But this was interesting to see, and I don't know enough about the biology about chlorogenic acid to know why this occurs, other than what they're talking about here. So I'm sure people could look at this and figure that out on their own. But again, this doesn't mean, as the people in the study said, that if you drink coffee, this is a cure for COVID. And that's not the case, obviously, but it's an interesting kind of fun fact that they saw in their simulations that they ran. Again, purely simulations. They need to do, as they say, further experiments in the lab and so on and so on. But I guess keep drinking your coffee just in case this is true. Or tea at a lower level. So drink more tea.
Got mine. Cheers.
That's good. So, some long COVID news. I thought this article was good. Where it's talking about, I guess, for people who want to know where the long COVID clinics are, and then also the prevalence of long COVID per state. You can see some states have a lot more cases of reported long COVID, I should say, than others, because maybe not everyone knows about long COVID still, or knows that they have those symptoms because it's so.
Sure. Where is that article from? Because Survivor Corps maintains the only map of post-COVID care centers in the country, so it's probably linked to us. But
Okay,
was
so
that
it's in Science News, and they say source map is from NIH Recover, so maybe NIH Recover got it from you guys? I don't know.
I bet they did, because we've got the only one. Okay, interesting.
Okay, yeah, so it's probably from you guys. So they source NIH Recover from there.
Interesting. I have to track that back. I'm curious.
Yeah. So if you go to the link here, I'll share the slides with everyone. So if you go on the link
Thanks.
in Science News, you could read the paper, or not the paper, but the article, and they'll have the sources in there. So, but yeah, I mean, that's some other resources just to know. They kind of split it up between that's why they have NIH Recover sites here. I think they were referring to that program.
Oh, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I'm now also, in addition to the publications committee that I've been sitting on for about a year, I'm also now on the Recover Committee on Autonomic Dysfunction.
Okay.
And we're writing the protocol for autonomic for trials that's due in a couple weeks. Anyway.
Oh, that's great.
Everyone know. They're looking at IVIG and beta blockers. Unfortunately, right now, not vagus nerve stimulation, which I'm pushing for.
Yeah, I mean, there's no information on that, so it's important to look at, definitely.
Well, there is. There's actually a ton of information on vagus nerve stimulation.
But not really peer reviewed. So
I mean, I can send you a lot of. I have loads of stuff. I mean, addressing a million of these symptoms. I can send you. There's tons of data.
Right, but is it directly linked to long COVID?
Yeah, I mean the like GammaCore had an EUA by summer of 2020. It's the only thing that has an EUA for at-home post-COVID use.
Right, EUA is not the same as a publication for.
Right, but I mean, but I'll send. I mean, there's there's more out there than on IVIG or and none of these things. That's the whole point is to do these trials to get that final.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't use that as a precursor.
Well, you do the trial so you could then do the right assays in the lab. That's the whole point of that. So, yeah. That's good. Okay. But yeah, so then this article was talking about, it's just an interesting article I'll share, but talking about potential ways that maybe it could help people long COVID. This one, some speech therapists and speech pathologists are saying potentially what's helped others, to help improve their, neurological conditions like word finding skills and improve their speech, they've noticed being impacted. I'm sure people here are aware of that with long COVID symptoms based on the neurological conditions. So there's some like basically exercises over a long period of time that seem to help some people. So that seemed to be maybe information to share, and others could potentially, if they're having some of these symptoms and stuff related to speech, they could look into things like that.
Doug, do you think that speaks to mitochondrial injury in neuron cells?
No idea. So that's there's no link again. Long COVID study with that. There's no studies out there, but can be not. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not gonna make any assumptions. So this other paper came out from
Can I ask Diane about that? What do you think about that, Diane? That last report on the speech therapy. Do you have any take?
I think that it can probably help, but I mean, we need more sort of root cause treatment than like, I think that this is the type of thing that like helps you get through your day. But we need to find the upstream causes of what's going on and get to the root of it. I don't think like this is going to get you all that far at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's basically
also speech therapy is incredibly labor intensive, and in terms of administering it to the number of people who would need it for cognitive dysfunction is just totally impractical.
Diana, do you look at the insulin resistance as a possible root cause?
Say that again.
Do you think that insulin resistance is a possible root cause?
Yeah, I think that it's a definite possibility.
Okay. So again,
I think there are multiple things that are going on simultaneously, and for each person there could be different pathways to sort of disruption in the body. And I think that is definitely one of them.
Thank you.
I mean, the things that we're seeing right now that are being used very effectively that people are getting relief from are low-dose naltrexone, things like fluvoxamine that are reducing inflammation in the brain, CoQ10, vagus nerve stimulation. There are things that are definitely working at a more root level than things like speech therapy.
Right. This is again.
Let me have some input on that.
So let me jump in here for a second. Sorry, Kevin, and I'll let you. This article is not saying this is a cure or this is a root cause. It's just saying this might be one thing that could help people. That's it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So speech therapy, along with other kinds of cognitive therapy, are just to decrease cognitive decline.
Exactly.
So it's used in aged patients. It's used in neurological diseases and disorders. It's used in neurological injury. It's just a basic strategy that many people can use to help prevent, again, cognitive decline.
I think that speech therapy.
I am a VNS researcher. I actually helped pioneer VNS for cognitive emotional restructuring and for treatment for TBI and other uses. And VNS has long been known to have positive impacts on immune function, but also that can be combined with, again, neurological disease and injury.
Yeah, I fully agree. I actually used vagus nerve stimulation in my own post-COVID case over 2 years ago, and largely attribute the fact that I'm completely fine to the fact that I had access to a gammaCore device in summer of 2020. And I also do think that there's something to be said.
The only thing that I would caution is that the best parameters to maximize effects, I don't think are clearly understood.
Right.
So you can get what's called an inverted U response, where if the parameters aren't titrated correctly, you actually might cause impairments. So it's just kind of a warning. And it's also, a reminder that further experimental investigation needs to be conducted in these areas. But
can you be more specific about where you would end up with negative repercussions from VNS?
Yeah, so it can involve. So there are a number of electrical stimulation parameters: intensity, frequency, the duration or phasic period of a stimulation burst. Those all contributed to different types of neurological effects. They may activate different types of vagal fibers. Mm-hmm. So, in my work, we find intensity and frequency dependent effects, and we can impair cognition or enhance cognition depending on those parameters. The same is true of immunological function. So again,
So the device that I have has a very specific
certain stimulation parameters for certain uses, medical indications, and those are likely the parameters that you are using. But
right, mine has a dosage schedule attached to it,
So let's avoid individual type, response to these things here, just so keep it since it's open for the public.
Well,
but the overall,
no, but we're talking about general response.
Right, but I'm saying the individual case study again. Let's avoid those kind of comments.
Yeah.
But the overall, what Kevin's saying is the overall how things are with his research and how things might be changing, which is important to know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Kevin, I wasn't sure who you were because you have a Kevin, you have just a phone number, so I wasn't sure who you were. That was my question. But I also want to say that any kind of intervention, including physical activity, all those kinds of things, they change your biochemistry too. So it's not just taking a drug that'll change your biochemistry. It's also any kinds of activities, mental or physical, that change your biochemistry or environmental, heat, things like that. So I think that it's just as valid to do something with your body as it is to take in a drug. To change your biochemistry. And so I think that is
well, and it can be a much more efficient delivery device for things like breathing issues in terms of getting, if your bronchial airway is shut down and, so breathing like an inhaler is not going to be as effective as the chemicals being released directly through your nervous system from the brain directly to the lungs.
So I agree with a lot that was just mentioned, but I'd like to remind people that physical activity or fitness level, again, is that's kind of a general prophylaxis for improved immunity. It's not necessarily selective. So again, when you're talking about certain infectious diseases, I certainly would, and I want to be careful here. Recommend that physical activity is important, but and can have positive effects. But you don't want to simply ignore pharmacological treatments. And in addition to that, physical activity, depending on the level and stress, could impair immune system function as well as cognitive function. And this gets back to that inverted U response. So anyway,
I think that's one of the reasons.
It's a little more complex than what is being suggested here today.
Okay.
But
so my name's Eve. My name's Eve, just to because maybe I'm only a phone number to you too, Kevin. So I'm not saying physical activity is good or bad. I'm saying that anything that you do physically or mentally is affecting your biochemistry, just as taking a drug. And so that's all I'm saying.
I think you guys are in agreement. But,
yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to needing further, more defined phenotyping within long COVID. But what we're seeing is like a lot of it could be described as like long COVID plus POTS. But even within that, you're going to have people who are susceptible to exercise intolerance and then other people for whom it helps. And I think that getting down to refining our definitions will help us get to a better path to recovery for people.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
that's
then in addition to phenotypes, I mean, it's very personalized. So you may have broad phenotypes, but within those phenotypes, you may
Right.
have.
I agree with you. I agree entirely.
Yep, yep.
this sort of leads to this next paper here, so that's a good conversation here. Well, this study done in the Netherlands, this kind of overlap here, but they basically looked at, again, this is kind of an epidemiological study, looking at cohort studies, they call it, where they just kind of characterized how people with mild to severe COVID, so mild is the green dots, initial, moderate, like COVID is the blue, and the severe critical is the red. And then the black one here is like your general population for these plots here. So it's kind of comparing over time with like health related quality of life assessments. Study did it here, how after, let's say, 12 months, at least in the Dutch population, that the people who are the green, this is like a 1 month to 12 months, as you can see in the x-axis, they start coming back up to the normal levels where, for these different conditions from, fatigue, pain, mental health, and so on. And then this one's here talking about physical functions and functionality, bodily pain, so on. So you can read the axes here, the titles here for the plots. So these ones here are saying, overall, what the study says is, mild disease, or when you had COVID, the acute case, that means within 12 months, a lot of people tend to not majority, but a lot of, I forgot the percentage. You have to read the paper, no percentage. But as you look at these plots, a lot of people return back to normal conditions after, not talking about the biology again. The biology might not be the same, but just purely looking at the participants and how they're reporting like their health quality. But they said, of course, severe, as you see from these plots, and the mild, and not the mild, but the initial moderate, don't actually recover after 12 months. So this was an interesting study to look at. Again, no biology here, nothing to talk about what could be causing this and not, but just purely kind of looking at how populations might resolve itself for these different distinct groups of people getting COVID. So I guess that might be some good news for people who are mild and going long COVID, that maybe the recovery is there for them after a year. And some other long COVID news that you guys might have seen.
Suggesting possibly that, there again, like that maybe it's a prolonged recovery.
Yeah, that's another thing too.
As opposed to, I still think that there needs to be some sort of dividing line between people who just take a long time for the brain swelling to go down from acute encephalitis, or, loss of smell, which just takes a long time to come back, and the people who are having novel symptoms in the post-acute or post-infectious stage.
Yeah, again, they don't talk about any of that stuff, biology, just looking at the overall population, how it changes. But yeah, all that stuff should be considered for further studies, definitely, to look at. Yeah, it could be long-term recovery, and they talked a little briefly in discussion about what all this stuff could mean. So yeah, all the different stuff you mentioned is very well part of this, but they're basically reporting, this is the data. So some other long COVID news. This Israeli study came out it came out a while ago, but the news article on this talking about it, 1 in 3 people failed to regain. It's kind of related to what it's saying there, but they don't talk about vaccine or how differences of the vaccine or not. And they're saying there's more prevalent long COVID, as we know, among women than men, overweight, or people who smoke. This is related to the women issue that everyone knows, or by now, at least in our group. But they're kind of more refined percentages than what I've seen in the past. But saying more than 17% of women have long COVID during this point, compared to 11% men. So, and then talking about different symptoms in this news article here, and the symptoms that are more prominent in women than men. We can take a look at that. And then this was something that was in the Washington Post, and they're basically talking about how one long COVID symptom that might not be as obvious as, let's say, fatigue, or your brain fog, or other factors that are more prominent, or breathing issues, or is that stroke, because people might not really pay attention to having a stroke or symptoms to go to blood clots and stroke until it's too late. So this cardiologist and others, they have in this article basically saying,
Harlan's on our board, and we ran we actually just ran a poll on this.
Okay, let me finish this here. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that, it's not necessarily people have to panic or not. This is not saying everyone who has COVID we're going to get strokes and panic. It's still your chances are relatively low, meaning you most likely won't get it. But this is like a stealthier version of people trying to of what long COVID cases might be that could actually lead to deaths that could be prevented. So in a sense, this is talking about pay attention to some things that you might not know about early warning signs like chest pain, unusual swelling that are related to strokes, and things that could lead to blood clots leading to strokes. And then again, it's not like everyone who will suffer COVID will get this, but as the others have pointed out, early treatment of this is one potential long COVID thing that you could actually treat and won't actually kill people. So this is an article to bring awareness to this, to make sure even though again the theme of it is don't panic, but you should probably pay attention if you've had COVID, even mild cases, just in case you have one of these early warning signs. So that was just the take-home message of this article. I thought was important to share.
We need to do better than early warning signs. We need biological indicators that in advance of clinical presentation of warning signs.
Well, yes, of course that's the main case, but until there's a biomarker, which is no such thing as a biomarker for long COVID, and many people are trying to research it, this is what you should look into.
Right.
We ran a poll on stroke incident recently because we've seen so much of it anecdotally.
What was the numbers you got?
I'd have to go back and look. I haven't checked the results in a while. I posted it maybe a couple months ago. And Harlan is on our board as well.
That's good.
Do you think blood pressure is determinative as a predictor, Diane?
No.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Hopefully the twin study will help with the biomarker concept. Yes,
we need to push that forward too. Exactly. I think so. That was the whole point of that too, once we get that moving. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
I'll
Okay,
look up the results for you guys.
Thanks. Be interesting to see what you get. But yeah, so then again, I just put this past the long COVID dashboard. The only one that's really out there kind of monitoring, we're in the U.S. at least. I don't see one for Europe or the rest of the world, but you can look at your county, which places have more prevalence for long COVID and things like that. Okay, let's look at the distribution. As I said, BQ.1.1 is on the rise, mainly so far in New York and the East Coast, but California is creeping in. I mean, BA.5, of course, is still there, but it's on the decline, which I'll show you in a second. If you look at the BioBot or the wastewater data from biobot.io, there is, I guess from last week, there is seemingly a decline in the wastewater nationally in the U.S. and the region, the Northeast, where it was rising. Down, but we've seen these, as you see here in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, where I'm at. You can see these spikes going back and down because all predictions are leading to that in the next few weeks that BQ.1, or next month or two, BQ.1.1 will be the prominent strain, and with the holidays coming in and things getting colder and people being more inside, this thing's going to go back up. So I guess that's what all predictions are saying. Whether predictions are true or not, maybe hopefully this will keep declining. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe these predictions are wrong, but we'll find out. This is just the CDC wastewater, same trends as you would expect. Again, and the other ones is having here the different wastewater treatment stuff, and you could notice, like for example, look at Palo Alto here, where a bunch of people I know are there, but you saw that trend last week was up, and then it dropped for their wastewater, but again, close by neighboring cities like San Jose, they keep rising. So it'd be interesting to see these patterns. You see these drops, but they're sometimes misleading because they go back up the next week.
I have the stroke results.
What are the numbers?
We had 200 respondents. I asked, have you suffered a stroke before COVID, since COVID, but had strokes prior to 0? I suffered a stroke since COVID. I'd never had a stroke prior to COVID, 10%. I suffered a stroke before COVID, but not since, 3%. And I've never suffered a stroke before since COVID, 86%. So that seems significant that there were 3% who had prior, which is just general population, I imagine. And that goes up to 10% of people who suffered a stroke since COVID, but had never had a stroke prior to COVID.
Okay.
So 20 out of 200 is not insignificant.
Right. But those are the numbers they're saying in that Washington Post article. Again, it's saying don't panic. Not everyone's going to get it, right? But,
Right. I mean, none of this is, it's just getting a sort of snapshot, but that seems to be consistent with what we're seeing.
Right. Yeah. And I guess
And these are 10% of people who have long COVID already. It's not 10% of the general population who had COVID. These are people who self-identify as having long COVID.
Right.
Important to distinguish.
Yep. And the key is basically if people are more aware of that, then they'll look at the early warning signs and maybe prevent their strokes. That was the key to get information and get out. So thanks. That's a good poll. Yeah.
Do any of you think that there's a are people more likely to develop severe long COVID who go into COVID with depression and other mental health issues that would be indicative of inflammation of the brain going into the virus?
I don't think there's any data either way to show that. So.
I mean, do you think not that is there? I know there's no data, but does anyone think that that's even a possibility out there, or is that crazy talk?
I wouldn't.
I mean,
know.
there have been studies that say like mental health issues and depression do make you more susceptible. But is that why, or I mean, is there any?
Outside my expertise, so
isn't depression associated with increased cortisol levels?
Again, don't make any conjectures that are not there. So that's for on COVID.
Sorry.
COVID, yeah.
Well, we do know that antidepressants are used effectively as a therapeutic. So that's not for acute COVID and long COVID.
Yeah. So again, I guess not my expertise, but so yeah, let's move on. Yes, I didn't know that. So sorry, Bill. We're gonna move on. So yeah, again, I don't want to make any recommendations or state assumptions that we don't have any answers to or basis for it. But there's definitely maybe something people could research. That's a good question, research question for people, right, to look into, Diane.
The question has been raised by researchers, but okay.
Right. Diana, may I ask you just say again, did you say that antidepressants are being effective for long COVID? Is that what you said?
Yes, things like fluvoxamine. Fluvoxamine's been used at Mayo for acute COVID since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Okay, so then this is just the nucleic acid test amplification looking overall. The hospitalizations are sort of on the rise as you would expect, small percentage as you see here, but it's rising as we saw in Europe with the BQ.1.1. So this is the trends now in the US, and you can see BQ.1.1 when it started being noticed and reported on the CDC trackers quickly rising. I mean, last week it was here, this week is here. You can see the percentages now, depending where you're at, 10 to 17%, on average 13%. You can see the New England area or this Northeast area, there's a lot more prevalence of it. If you look at that olive, like dark green color. So that's, again, all the predictions are saying this BQ.1.1 is going to be by January, the new BA.5, the prominent one. A few months ago, they thought it was BA4.6, but you can see that hasn't really changed in amount circulating. It's been 10%, like kind of hovering there, because I think BQ.1.1 is out competing it pretty well. So then globally, this is the trends. You can't really make out stuff here, but you can see a lot of the stuff is on decline. I'll go one by one. Germany was where BQ.1.1 was first prominent. And this is BA.5. You can see how BQ.1.1 really took off in cases and hospitalizations, even surpassed the BA.5 wave there. But now they're on the decline. Singapore had that other variant that we talked about last week, the XBB, and they're on the decline. But XBB is not too prominent in the US or a lot of Europe. But this is one of the other variants of concern or interest that have a lot of immune evasion that people are looking at. And it was primarily Singapore really boosted that up. And for the rest of Europe, Portugal seems to be relatively low still, so that's good. They didn't get impacted like Germany did, and France had a little peak here. This is the BQ.1. You can see they're coming back down. It wasn't as dramatic as Germany was. UK still had a small bump, but again, people in the UK are saying potentially BQ.1.1 is making its way, to the UK from Europe, from the rest of Europe, and maybe they might see a wave that has some predictions people make, but that could be wrong too. The US we already talked about. It looks like hospitalizations are sort of dipping back up as the other ones, and it's plateaued. So we're expecting this to go back up, but maybe not. Well, we'll see. From all predictions, it looks like we'll be hitting into that. South America, I mean, Brazil, I usually show, but South America tends to follow all the South American countries over, on average, tend to follow Brazil pretty well for their trends. That region tends to be pretty uniform with trends, as you can see here. But they're all at relatively low cases. They don't have any reported hospitalizations. Actually, you could find that data for, but deaths are there too. So, but the cases are relatively low. Well, reported cases, because of course there's a lot of around the world people doing the home tests which are not reported. Japan had the BA.5 peak here, right? So this is what it's coming back down, but there's having this little uptake here, and I haven't seen anything. Maybe I tried to look, but I haven't seen anything in the news talking about this little upturn as we see here. Maybe we got to pay attention what it's going to be, and if it keeps going up, and similar to South Korea as we see here. And these are countries that follow, mass protocols and do pretty well usually with protocols that you can see from before Omicron hit them. So I haven't seen much in the news about this uptake, but this might be coming back down again next week, but we'll keep an eye on it. India's been relatively low. Again, there is no reported hospitalization, admissions, or patients in ICU, unfortunately, but these things are there. South Africa, again, look at the cyclical pattern. We see doesn't seem like these variants have hit South Africa yet, or it's affecting them yet. If it will, so maybe it won't. Hopefully, and that's it. So I don't know if there's any questions, comments.